So I got about 20 minutes to get this done. So we are gonna fly through this fly, but I'm gonna try to hit on everything you need. If you've never tied a musky fly before, after this, you're gonna be able to. That's the point. What's going on, everybody? Gunnar here. Today we're gonna dive into some modern musky meat, and we're gonna tie a musky double. Let's check it out. So we got a few priorities for this fly. First off, I want it to be big. I'm allowed to make that choice. My muskies eat a lot of suckers. Suckers are big. I like to fish a big fly a lot of times in that 10, 11, 12 inch size class, but I would like that to be a single hook pattern. So those are some of the things we got to consider. So therefore, if we're going to tie a 12-inch fly with a single hook, where that hook is kind of a big deal. So this is a very simple solution. This is nothing new. This has been around the block for a long time, but we're going to run a hook shank rig to make a nice beefy musky double. Perfect hook placement, balanced fly, simple materials. So this right here is the proposed rigging. Very simple solution. Shank up front, hook kind of in the middle of the back. Fly's going to be about that long. Look at that, hook's right kind of in the third midpoint. It's a beautiful thing. Now what we're trying to solve, or basically avoid with this style of rigging, is a failure of this joint. You know, a lot of people tie single hook flies. I love fishing single hook flies up to about 8 inches. That's about kind of my max for e-socks. And then you want to start slipping that back. Well, when you articulate it, a lot of guys pull inspiration from the articulated trout realm, right? And that's where I started my tying. So I did that for many years. I would run 2 hook flies for pike and muskie. And of course, it's the best of both worlds. You got a hook up front and a hook in the back. The problem is that wire joint, which is usually it's nylon coated. This doesn't have nylon coating, but it's usually like 30, 40 pound wire, 7x7 strands, stuff like that, 19 strand, 43 strand. I forget all the strands. I haven't done it in a while. But eventually they kink, eventually they fail. Now if that fails on a fish, that kind of sucks. If the fly doesn't last long and it goes on the wall, well then, no big deal. But what you're trying to avoid is a failure of that joint on a potential fish. Also, sometimes that wire kind of gets jacked off to the side, and then your back hook and your front hook don't line up the way they should, and you kind of get it turning the same way every time, or not turning at all, or it fouls more, but things happen. So this is basically a simple fail-proof rig where the joint can't fail, and because we got Flyman's new next generation shank, we literally have a shank that can go 35, 45, 55, 65, 80 millimeters long to scale this fly up from 9 to 10 to 11 to 12, 13, 14 inches. So it's a really simple platform. I tend to put a heavy hook in the back. One of the cool things about doing this rig, instead of doing a dropper shank, which I'll talk about kind of next, probably in the next video, but this hook is dressed, which means all this hook weight is supported by naturally neutrally buoyant material like feathers and bucktail. So this rig tends to suspend perfectly level in the water, tends to fall level in the water. When you start doing dropper shanks, which is another solution to the problem, very cool solution, because you can swap out hooks, change hook sizes, fish trebles, split ring things on and off at your leisure. But that becomes an isolated point of mass on the fly that either needs to be counterweighted or balanced or supported. There's a lot of problem solving you got to do to make those rigs work and swim true the way you want. This is simple. Very few things can go wrong with this. You can put a pretty beefy hook. This is the SA210 Bob Clouser 2-aught. For anybody in the musky know-how, the new SA210s, which is a saltwater hook, and the TP612s from Ahrex, which is the Trout Predator short, are magnificent musky hooks. Absolutely near perfection for musky hook, but it's got a lot of weight. And so when we're gonna have this big, you know, water distorting push head that's gonna tend to slow down, kind of like a semi-truck locking up the brakes, well, you got a big trailer behind it that's fully loaded and ain't gonna stop, right? We got a pretty beefy 2-aught hook, saltwater gauge wire that's going to have some wet hackles, which are really slippery and have some water weight to them. That sucker's going to push and jackknife the fly. You'll get a nice turn, and because it's level, because all of the hook weight is being suspended, it tends to profile show and just kind of sit there. Beautiful thing for musky fishing. Unbelievably simple problem-solving solutions. Crazy simple material set, albeit the hackles are expensive, but we'll talk about them real quick because the hackle choice is important. So what we're going to use for hackles before we get to the body is whiting Schlappen bundles. Hackle selection is important for kind of, let's go 2 characteristics, maybe it's 3, I don't know how many are going to pop in my head, but one is obviously length. You need long feathers. Now, you can probably get long saddle, but it's not going to be very webby, and if it is very webby, the stem's not going to be very thick. And that's where Schlappen bundles come in. This is kind of the feather connecting the saddle to the cocktail feathers. The cocktail feathers tend to be unruly, unreasonably stiff, very thick stem, hard to tie in and control. The Schlappen is kind of in between saddle, rooster tail. Saddle, rooster tail, there's this little pocket of Schlappen. Nice stiff stem so that when fish bite it, it doesn't just break and fall apart and get deteriorated or even break from its own water weight, which will happen with a very webby saddle style feather. Still excellent movement, good swim and profile, so they're fantastic feathers, but that's why you're selecting that. One, you need the length, which you can get elsewhere in saddle, but saddle won't have the durability. So you're getting the best of both worlds, length, durability. You can also find thin and webby versions in here. So depending on how you want to use it, typically you're going to go webby because you're trying to create a silhouette. You're not trying to accent things. You're literally using this as like a bundle of tailing material on the fly. Moving forward, the only technique you actually need to be able to tie the fly with any sort of proficiency is hollow tying bucktail. I'm going to do this without editing. That's kind of the goal. I don't know, I've really started editing a lot of my videos, and I think that's cool. They're fast-paced. You know, if you're accomplished and have some flies under your belt, I think they're more entertaining, but I think they do a beginner the disservice of maybe going too fast or skipping over things and not being able to learn just from watching. So we're going to go slow. I'm not going to edit nearly anything unless I make a mistake. But all you need to do is basically hollow tie bucktail, and I'm going to walk you through it step by step. I also have a breakaway video if you want to learn how to hollow tie. We can cover you there. And then the head's just going to be a reverse or hidden bulkhead, which if you can hollow tie, you'll be able to do it. So I'm going to put some new batteries in the cameras because I didn't before I started, and we're going to start tying. Last thing, thread choice. I'm going to tie with 8/1000 monofilament thread. If you never tried it, mono's the bee's knees. It's my favorite tying thread of all time. I typically use 6/1000, but I ran out on my bobbin and I was too lazy to replace it. So I got one spooled up with 8/1000 because that was already on. 8/1000 is crazy strong. I don't think I've ever broken it in a tying setting, which is saying something. I'll prove the strength to you while we're tying. But anyway, mono is elastic, so it's forgiving if you don't have a perfect circular bobbin path, but you tend to ovalize things. It'll suck up some of that slack as long as you have some good tension on it. It's round, so it'll bite the bucktail, really get it to flare and pop. You can hold it down with very few turns. It'll bite into the hackle stems. Nothing's going to slip out. And it also has some build. It's quite a thick diameter, 8/1000. So when you do your hollow ties, you can make your thread dams to turn the bucktail backwards very, very quickly. It makes tying very efficient. So that's just some characteristics of it. We're also going to use some Zap medium CA+, and this stuff likes to react with mono thread. It likes to kick when it kind of undergoes that chemical reaction there, and the kick basically fuses the mono. It turns it into like a piece of plastic. Instead of a bunch of strands of mono, it's a piece of plastic. So your durability in a fly like this, especially your material dams forcing the bucktail backwards, it just takes durability to the max. Everything is literally welded in place. So I think I have talked enough. Let's tie fly. So I got about 20 minutes to get this done. So we are gonna fly through this fly, but I'm gonna try to hit on everything you need. If you've never tied a musky fly before, after this, you're going to be able to. That's the point. If you're curious about the material set, this is the kind of fundamentally most castable musky pattern you're going to get if you do your bucktail correctly. Sparse, open. You do those two things, it'll be huge in the water, ton of breath, but when you pull it out, it'll all collapse down from being slicked back from the water so that it has like no air resistance. So it's really important that you tie sparse. We're going to do layered bucktail stacks of hollow, basically all the way up the hook shank to get you a fairly castable, massive profile musky fly. So I'm going to start my thread, start it at your hook eye so that you can wrap down that tag end, especially if you're using like GSP. You really got to get that down. Give it a straight hard pull. All my straight hard pulls for the whole video, you're going to see me turn my bobbin so that my thread isn't getting a bunch of pressure on the edge of my bobbin nose. It's a great way to break your thread. I'm going to tighten the rotation of my vise. So we have this huge thread base, and I'm going to go all the way back up and all the way back down. That base is so locked onto that hook shank. That's the foundation of your fly, the foundation of your durability. It's important. As far as putting in some flash, I'm going to use some Magnum Flashabou. I'm going to take a bunch of different colors so that everything is blendy-wendy and very complex. Now typically I wouldn't do this first. Typically I would layer this kind of over the bucktail to give it a little bit of lift off the fly because it tends to stick together in the water if you put it all in one spot, but beginners are going to have a not a hard time, but a more difficult time doing that and getting it evenly distributed and done in a really nice manner. And the simplest thing you can do is put it on first, wrap it around your hook shank, and just pin it to the top and then tie over top of it. It's a pretty simple thing to do. You're going to get a nice bushy flash tail right there. It's going to slink back and go about the length of our hackles. Now if you're wondering why put some flash in a fly, it's because fish are shiny. If you ever fought a fish and it was sitting there shaking its head and rolling on a sunny day, my guess is it threw off some light. I would like my fly to do the same. So I'd like to put quite a bit of flash in there. If you have more pressured water, you can go a little bit sparser. Sometimes flash will turn fish off if they get fished a lot. So keep that in mind. You can definitely run the pattern without the flash. I'm going to come in with 3 basically grades and colors of bucktail to get an overall complex fly. And what we're simply going to do is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, finish, finish, finish. Basically like that. I don't know the exact thing because I'm kind of just making this up. But you're going to alternate colors. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So instead of sitting here and saying taking colors and hand blending them to get something very complex, you're just going to stage it through the fly so that as it all slicks back, because they're going to overlap, it's going to give the illusion of it being blended, multi-toned, very depth, very real, very natural in the water. And then we're going to finish with a dark silhouette, a dark head for contrast. It's kind of just my favorite way to do it. Now this is, again, not crazy premium hair. It's like A-grade hair, Primo tail from Musky Fly Fishing, if you want to check it out. But I'm going to start light. So this is some 4-inch hair. We're going to put our hackles on top of this. So I kind of mentioned you should go pretty sparse with your bucktail. That's on your bucktail hollow ties. Right now, I'm going to go a little denser than I normally would for my hollow ties. I'm gonna, see, I'm going so fast, I forgot to articulate all that. I'll hook you guys up on the next one, I promise. Forgive me for that, but you're just gonna have to listen for the next one. I'm gonna put down, more importantly, a good base of bucktail so that when we put our feathers on, I told you the tail is supposed to give the illusion of silhouette. Well, if you put your hackles on and they go like that, that's not a lot of silhouette, is it? But if I can put kind of a big, thick bucktail base, it'll give those hackles something to kind of lay on, and then we're going to stack them in the round. We're going to tie them kind of a tent kind of on top and a tent on the bottom so that we have a 360 degree symmetrical tail. If you just want to stack them on top and tent them Johnny King style, I'm totally cool with that. I might even do that. But what we're going to do is we're going to take 4 hackles, medium webbiness, and the length of these will determine the overall proportions of the fly and basically how long of a front shank I choose. If you make it really long, you're going to kind of want a long front shank and really get some length to this hair and really flare it out. If you go short, you can use a short little shank and tie a little 10-inch articulated fly. So we'll do one of each color. I'm going to put the lighter color underneath because that makes sense to me. I'm going to choose a moderate webbiness. If you go crazy webby, that's also a lot of water weight. So just keep that in mind. Medium webbiness. Yeah, these two are dang near the perfect feathers. And I got 2 of them, which is wonderful. So I got 2 perfect feathers. Now that would be almost the perfect length. You can see it kind of, you can't see, it's out of frame. It's right where my Flashabou ends. So that's fine by me. It's probably 9 inches out the back. That one. Yes, gimme, gimme, gimme. Now, of course, I can't really teach you how to select and grade your own material. That takes a lot of time to get familiar with it and understand what you're looking for and what you need in the moment. But I can tell you, I will kind of pair all these up and just make sure they're all roughly, you know, within like an inch of each other so that I don't have one hackle that sticks out beyond the rest. That's usually no bueno in my opinion. You want them all kind of ending at the same spot. Now these stems are crazy stiff. That stiffness is good. Stiffness is durability, but they are perpendicular to your feathers. If your feathers are flat and you want them flat on the fly, stem runs like that. So if you take your thread over that and you pull really taut, guess what happens? Your feather does a 90-degree turn. Pretty infuriating if you're trying to do something technical. What I'd recommend, get a pair of scissors that have a big, nice flat line on them like these guys. Open them up and then squish that stem in there and kind of smash the crap out of it so that it's flat the way the feathers are supposed to be flat. Let's pin these guys kind of on the side, I guess. You can tell by my authority that I'm speaking with, that's exactly the way you're supposed to do it. Gonna smash this one. Put that one on the side, and then we'll tint the olive ones over the back, which will give a cool illusion of being counter-shaded. If these want to roll a little bit, I say let them roll. This is not some super delicate trout fly. I don't think none of this should have a crazy amount of significance to it, other than however much you want to put on it, really. The business is kind of the chassis, the hook selection, the hook weight and gauge, the shank length and proportions of the fly and the bucktail and the shank, and then the head design are all significantly, infinitely more important than how you position these hackles. I am unwinding and readdressing one because it wanted to roll on me, and I thought if it wanted to roll, it would be better suited on this side. And it just seems to want to fight me no matter what I do with it, which is fine. So by pinching that thing flat, I have a lot more control over where those hackles go and how to get them on the fly, and really not spend too much time bashing my head in trying to get them where I want. You can see it's got some volume to it. They are not flat on flat. I think that is the more important thing. And then we're going to weld all that mono together with some CA Plus and just hurry that up because we ain't got that much time. I'm going to come in with just a not crazy grade. I guess that's longer than I realized. It's a pretty nice tail. This one's actually from Hairline. This was in my private stash that was on sale on my website, and nobody bought it, and I thought, I'm taking that. Anyway, so you cut this off the hide. I should have done this when we did the last step. I was going too fast. You're going to grab this kind of at the midpoint, and bucktail has some short hairs that you can just flick out. You don't need them. They're not going to serve you any purpose. Then pinch your fingers together and pull out any fur, insulate a fiber. It's going to reduce the bucktail's ability to compress. It won't be tied in as securely. If you're not using a very durable thread, those hairs can be oddly enough sharp and can kind of cut your thread. And then you are more or less ready to go. You can see me kind of dropping this in my hand. It's fairly advanced, but what I'm doing is I'm stacking the butts so they're nearly all flush and vertical. Now you can go and cut all of these if you're worried about water weight, but it's not really a real thing you got to worry about, especially with your bucktail ends. So you can just kind of sloppily put this on here. You're going to have to do this little hand exchange. It's quite difficult to keep the bucktail flat. When you bring your thread up, I'm going to do this. It's super cool. Let me rotate this. I got it from Giovanni de Pace, I think. I don't know. But you take your thread, you bring it up into your fingers, and now my fingers have that thread. So I can come down with slack, lovely slack, and I can pull it straight down. Now, I need to kind of wedge that thread back and forth so that my thread path is perpendicular to my hook shank. It's quite important that that thread path is perpendicular to your hook shank, because I'm going to take my thumbnail, I'm going to shove it right on top of all these wraps. And if that thread is kinked off front to back or back to front, if it has some angular twist to it, the hair is not going to rotate evenly around the shank. It's quite infuriating. So you got to get perpendicular wraps, nothing super tight yet, and now I can just pinch the snot out of it. And under light tension, when you squeeze it and squeeze it and squeeze it, it just whoop, 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 whoop. It fills it in and tries to run away from that pressure until it's nice and even. Then you can kind of hold it in place, give it a straight hard pull. My bobbin nose is in line with my thread so I don't cut anything. I might add 1 or 2 wraps just for additional pressure. So that only has 5 turns of thread on it. That's it. Now I'm going to keep this hand, some hand, if you have a third one, that would be ideal, will be on this bobbin, and I will never let go of it until that thread is well in front of this bucktail and secure. If you just let go now, these wraps can back off. You lose your durability. And I don't want a big, huge bundle of thread back here. That's completely unnecessary. So take your fingers, kind of make like a little cone if you can, and just reef it over that hook eye. Don't smash your fingers into your hook point. It will happen eventually. Switch hands, preen it back, take your thread path up through and onto the shank, few wraps forward, few wraps back. That is called the Chinese finger trap. At least that's what I call it. I learned it from Mike Schmidt. With only 5 turns of thread on this, look at this. You ain't getting that out of there. I don't care. You can grab single hairs and they will not come out of there, because that is proper tying technique. Round thread, compress it, keep it under tension, bring it up to the front, forward and backwards so that these wraps can't ever back off. And that's all you need. So choose the right thread, use the right technique. Now you can see I'm kind of just manhandling this. To get it to kind of go the way I want, you're going to preen that back, and you're going to start making kind of a thread ball cone in front of that to hold it back. Now there's something absolutely critical here when you're making this cone, and it is the tension or the kind of resistance in your thread. And we'll talk about that on the next one so that I have something to talk about on each one. I'm going to come forward a little bit. You're probably like, wait, I wanted to know that right now. Well, you got to wait a sec. Or else, if I talk about everything at one spot, I'll run out of things to talk about and turn the video off. So you can see that was pretty quick and simple. We already progressed up the fly. We're going pretty quick here. Things are looking good. Again, bucktail, sparse, cut it off the hide. Pinch the tips, midpoint, a little bit higher. Take out the fluff. You don't need the fluff. Take the butts, drop them into your hand so they are flush. This is a very advanced skill, but your material handling will go through the roof if you can do it. Don't let these butts push down this hair. You don't want that. If they do, clip it a little bit. Bring that thread up into your fingers so you can pull it down under slack so that you can get perfectly perpendicular thread path wraps so that your thumbnail can manipulate this hair under your pinches so that it all distributes evenly. Man, I feel like a broken record. Gonna give that some good compression. Make sure that my density is uniform all the way around the hook. Take an extra turn or two. Get that going the way you want. Never let go of the bobbin. Keep it under tension the entire time. Pull it back hard. Bring it up and onto the shank. Wrap forward, wrap back. It's locked in place. Now, when you start building this cone, remember, 8 thousandths builds quickly. That's kind of, I went too fast last time. And what you're going to do here is you need to be able to tie with less pressure than my bobbin is set to, because if I start building a cone and I get this nice cone and I have some bucktail underneath that cone and then I pull down real hard, it'll cinch down, boop, and reflare all that hair. And you'll kind of have to redo another hollow tail, and you'll get these cones that are massively long and taking up way too much room on the shank. What you want to do is, as you build up your cone and you get to the back of it, you pull out thread on your bobbin so that you can tie lightly. And so no more thread is getting tugged out. Instead, I'm eating up the thread that is out, and I have to be very delicate as that thread basically is overlapping and on top of my bucktail. But it gives me complete control. Now right now I think that is down too much, and so I can walk it off. Yeah. Now that is perfect. Now I am going to put some flash in here. If I show you all the flash steps, this fly will take forever. So I'm not going to do that. I will try to edit those out perhaps. But I'll show you this first one if you ever want to do it. Now, because we're imitating basically a sucker of some kind, coppers and golds are my favorite. So I'm going to come in with a medium brown wing and flash, very fine shredded mylar. Basically, it just blends into the bucktail. Like, you can't tell. It's not like a different texture, and it just is very subtle, very nice. I'm going to put a little taper into that. We'll throw some on top. Catch that the same technique we've been catching bucktail with, so I can pull it straight down and my thread doesn't kind of wrap it around. I'm just flaring that out so it's not all in one place. I'm going to take the fibers that were pointed over the nose of my hook, pull them backwards, put some tension on that. Bada bing, bada boom, you got some flash in the fly. You don't have to make it more complicated than it needs to be. It's not going to help anybody. Now we're going to come back in, and we're back to the first color, right? We did light, orange, green. We're going to go back to light. It doesn't really matter where you are in the fly. You just keep that progression going until you get towards the head. Now, so far, everything's been pretty sparse. This one is going to be a hair denser. As the bucktail work moves farther forward, you can just increase the density, 5% here, 5% there, so that the hair at the head is significantly more dense than the hair at the tail. It's kind of an important thing. See me packing those bases. I already ripped out the under fluff. That hand transfer is pretty tricky. Getting that thread up and in your fingers is tricky, but it allows you to pull down completely under control, 3 turns in the exact same place. If you do the same thing every time, if you can repeat it, if you can get that level of consistency, you will always be able to tie the same flies. Really reef on that. I don't know, this is a salt. Look at this, I'm shaking the whole table. Like, I pulled this 8/1000 thread is stronger than snot. There's some serious tension on there, which is why 5 turns will hold it for a lifetime. Really reef on that. Kind of soften it up at the bases so you can really work on it. Bring the thread through. One of the trickiest things you're going to find when you're doing this is not bringing fibers with your thread, but as you bring it up underneath, my wraps fell off my hook eye, so I'm going to re-cinch, re-put it down, because I don't have any hook shank to do a Chinese finger trap. And you can see this light hair is significantly higher quality than that orange and the green. In fact, it goes all the way back. That would bother me normally, but because we're layering it, the next layers, as we move forward, it just works. This kind of method of switching color every single tying point, it allows you to use multiple grades as the tips overlap each other at different layers throughout the fly. It's not quite like building a perfect beast fly. It's a little bit more kind of haphazard than that, but the end results are pretty good. Now, you can see I'm doing something right here, which is going to be scary to most people. I call it trusting the flare. I'm letting this get big and bushy, and that doesn't bother me, because when you get this wet, and this is something that you should do when you're done tying it, you're going to get this wet under the sink, and the water will set this to the shape that it will fish and how you want those fibers to rest. It'll kind of tame them, control them, take out some of the static. It does a bunch of good things to the fly. Now, I'm going to come in with a 55 millimeter next generation shank from the Flymenfishing Company. And that is going to get our musky double at near perfect proportions for this hook choice and hackle length. Trying to really get that locked in. You don't have a ton of room to grab the shank with the new versions, but they did some really nice things with these next gen shanks that I absolutely love. First off, when you're looking for articulated shanks, especially for big flies like this, something you want to consider is the R-bends being both front and back. So this is a double R-bend style shank. You can see I have 3 sections of wire here. That's really important. Instead of just having a bent over closed hook eye loop, those can open up, especially under a lot of pressure. You hook into a 40-pound muskie who's thrashing, you're trying to button them up and not give them an inch. You know, like the old 35 millimeter shanks, that hook eye could open up. You got to be pretty careful. So full R-bends can't open up, which means you can make a really durable shank with a pretty light wire, which is really nice. The other thing, because the R-bends go the full length, you don't cut your thread on them, and the diameter of the shank is uniform start to finish. It's a really good thing. They did a square articulation joint on the back. I don't know if you guys can see that because my vise is in the way. So the back of these guys is a square joint, which reduces following quite a bit. A lot of times on your shanks, the round ones, you'd get up in here and they would do this kind of weird jackknife and lock thing, just like that. Significantly reduced with the square backdrop, which I kind of like. I just wish that that back was bigger. If this was bigger, you'd have more gripping power with your vise, which would be nice, but it's not the end of the world. And of course they have a bunch of lengths: 35, 45, 55, 65, and 80. I'm going to start all the way in the back this time. It might seem odd, but that's because I want to stiffen everything that's locked down in my vise. Otherwise, you'll have this really limp shank if you try to lock it down way the heck up here. You can see that wire. You can see how hard I tie. You can see that everything just kind of bending and flexing. That's just the reality of musky flies. I'm going to re-get that guy as hard as I can. And that's about the best we're going to be able to do right now. So I think I have finally talked enough. I'm going to blow through this shank. You guys should know what to do. Rewatch the hollow tie section of this video and the back hook if you have any questions. I'll see you guys right about here, and I'll show you a new technique called the hidden bulkhead or the reverse bulkhead, which is really just a really fluffy hollow tie, and it's a perfect way to finish off some musky meat. All right, let's do it. One thing I forgot to mention that I should point out is where I'm grabbing my hair from. If you split a tail kind of into thirds, the top tends to be more dead, not the most useful in my opinion. This middle part is, well, it's the greatest part you can ever use for hollow ties. Typically has the longest hair, moderate compressibility, good amount of flare while still being stiff enough to control. This bottom third is what you're going to use to do the head. It tends to be a little bit softer or more easily kinked because it has a ton of trapped hair. It almost behaves like deer belly hair. Now this one, this is kind of a deader tail. You can just tell by feeling it. That's something you'll get used to. This has a lot of trapped hair in it. This one's quite a bit dead, but it's no big deal. I'll be able to make it work. Now something you also saw is my hand is supporting this shank while I'm tying. Because these shanks don't have a huge place to grip it with your vise, I can just rip that thing right out of there because I tie it so hard. And so I'm physically holding the shank while holding the bucktail so that I can really reef on it. So keep that in mind. And also check out this color scheme that we've been able to develop from light orange, green, light orange, green. We have like this pale undercarriage of the sucker. You ever look at a sucker, their bellies are almost pure white, like stark white. So we have this pale underbelly. Red horse and river red horse and even carp sometimes have these red or orange fins. So you have these kind of fin highlights. These could be your pelvic fins. These could be your pectoral fins. And then we have these kind of muted greens because a lot of them have kind of mottling and splotches in different colors. And then we're going to finish with this kind of dark contrasting green head. So it's a really cool way to build a fly with a lot of complexity, negating the perfect taper format that is often associated with hollow ties and beasts, allowing you to use kind of multi-grade tails of different colors. And you might be like, I don't know where to use this green. I don't want an all green fly. Just mix it up. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, or whatever it is. And I forget what we even did. I think I have 3 sections of the light. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3, 3. So we're going to finish with 3 sections. If you can do it in 2, I don't think it'll be dense enough. We're going to do 3 of what is called a reverse bulkhead, hidden bulkhead. I think Pops might have just called it a bulkhead, but it's basically a reverse bulkhead tie with a hollow tie at the same time. Nomenclature doesn't matter. Let me show it to you. Nomenclature aside, you're going to start with tail hair from that bottom third where it should have the most trapped air. You're still going to clean out the butts. That lower section does not offer you anything of value to some degree. Notice I still have, I did like the midpoint down, just to be clear. Now you're going to, if you want to be really cool, you can taper these a little bit and just kind of make them messy so you don't get any straight lines. That's a Paul Monaghan technique right there. Now you're going to leave these butts in. But because these butts have a lot of trapped air, they should flare. Now you're going to use the same kind of pinch technique to get a nice thread control perpendicular path. You can see those butts already flaring up. I'm going to support my shank while I push down on that and get all that evenly distributed. Now I'm going to kind of hold the hair and the shank so I can really reef on it. And I'm pulling towards myself so I don't just rip it out of my vise. Give that an extra turn or 2, and look at these butts. So we're going to leave those in to help disturb and push water, add a little bit of buoyancy to the head, and really back these guys up so that the head can't collapse when you strip it. And it's going to create a boatload of turbulence. It's a wonderful thing. It's going to send the tips of all this bucktail into action, as well as this hackle, to get a fly that swims subtly like a real fish while you strip it. And then if you design it right with a heavy hook and the head slows down, you should get a semi-decent profile turn. Of course, everything is kind of relative to your density and buoyancy, and you'll have to figure it out. No 2 big flies are alike, and nobody ties them the same way. Your best bet is to learn to tie and tie really well so that you can make flies do what you want them to do. So that is perfection. Now, because we're getting towards the tip, you can see I'm kind of leaving the hair fairly open. Like, really, you got to trust the flare here. Do not try to tame that or really push it back. You really want that to be able to flex and breathe and be pretty stout with your angle here. Now I'm going to grab quite a bit of hair. This should be the densest hair that you've been working with for the whole fly. Kind of just uneven those tips a little bit. That was a little bit much, so I pack them back. Loosely get them back on there. You can see I didn't quite get my Giovanni pinch because my hands were at a different angle. So I'm going to kind of, we'll just take it off. You guys should not be hesitant to back things off and try again if they don't go the way you want. I'm going to try this again. Much better. Now I'm going to give that just a little bit of flair so that my thread doesn't slide all over the place. Whoop. Really reef that down. 5 very aggressive turns. Get your thread through there. Now we're right at the hook eye, and you might be hesitant to be like, you know, I'm going to crowd this bad boy. I don't know what I'm going to do. You got this. Do not worry about it, because look at how dense all that stuff behind where my thread is right now. So this last stack, you don't got to worry about, you know, packing 3 pencils worth of hair on there. Just put enough on there to give it some life and fill it up so you got a really clean, beautiful looking fly. If you're worried about crowding it, stop. You can just be done now. It makes no difference to how the fly is going to fish, really. Yep, nailed it. Nailed it. You're mine. All right. So you can just see how kind of big and bulky that head is. It's a wonderful thing. Perfect hook placement, single hooked. Nice sparse long hackles that are going to give a pretty good silhouette. I'm going to tug this one a little bit more to where I want. And what you're going to do here, just to finish it off and really get that nice super clean silhouette, is to tame these fibers back the way they're going to be when they fish, the way they're going to be in the water, the way they're going to be fish when you strip it. And you're just going to run that under the sink. Wait for your glue to dry, or else the water will mess up the kick and you'll get a big white chalky looking head that's not very attractive. Yeah, so we're going to get this guy wet, hang dry it, and I'll show you the finished results. But thanks for bearing with me. I know I talked a lot. I know I talked really fast. I tried to put as much info into one video as I could think about, so that if you've never tied with bucktail before, you've never tied a musky fly before, or you didn't maybe understand some of the problem solving of the musky fly, you know, the forage, suckers, chubs, fall fish. I mean, they're typically pretty big. Even a small musky fly is going to be 7-8 inches. Trying to find that perfect hook placement. They tend to T-bone, they tend to slash and grab. They don't tend to feed like a bucket mouth species, which tends to go for the head. They tend to grab, bring something down to the bottom, sit with it in their mouth, and then let go, bite it, let go, bite it, let go, bite it, and try to turn it head first, because the forage they eat is so big. You know, they eat 20-inch suckers, for real. So getting that ideal single hook placement on a long fly, big fly platform on a joint that won't fail. Everything from basically a head that slows down to heavy hook weight, not just heavy gauge for the fish that you're chasing, but heavy gauge also to get that kind of jackknife action as the head slows down, the back hook rams into it. The fact that that back hook, which is heavy, is dressed so that it's not a singular point of weight, changing the balance of the fly per se, but it's fully supported by all the tailing materials. We went over hackles. We went over getting kind of cool custom, you know, bucktail blends throughout the fly to really make it complex and real and exactly how fish look. So I gotta go grab my kid from daycare. Let's run this under the sink. I'll catch you guys in like an hour when this is dry and show you what it looks like.